Urbanization is the growth of city populations, springing more traffic and pollution, as well as issues of safety and sanitation. But technology can alleviate these problems with smart cities, autonomous cars, smart transport, connected buildings, and artificial intelligence systems.
Let's start by examining a city that's on the forefront of new technology, Austin, Texas.
Typically when I'm showing somebody town, I'm showing them downtown, all the restaurants, all the coffee shops, Waterloo Records, Book People. We've got our barbecue, the Broken Spoke, Moody Theater. They call it the live music capital of the world, and it's a pretty justified name. We've got a real interesting variety of people here. Hardware and software technology people. It's the state capital. You've got the University of Texas right downtown. So you've got a great educated population and a real dramatic economy that has transformed over the years. I mean, you've got all these new buildings, construction going on all over the place. We've got a lot of people moving downtown. In general, a lot of traffic.
Our traffic is now worse than the Big Apple, according to the National Traffic Scorecard.
With the local news media constantly talking about the astonishing number of people that move to Austin every day, we thought we'd take it to the streets and ask the question, is traffic really that bad?
Over the last 10 years, the traffic has gotten horrendous. It needs more public transportation.
It's so hard to drive, park, pay for parking every time you go to a restaurant, all that. I think it just kind of makes you want to use public transportation more.
From Slaughter to Westlake, how long a bus ride would take? 4 hours. That's crazy.
It's crazy.
That's your entire day. Like, you have to wake up super early in the morning, and many people do it.
So it was unanimous. Everyone we talked to agrees that traffic in Austin is a huge problem. But is the answer to just continue investing in new roads and public transportation, or should we look to the future to find the best solution?
50 years ago, about 40% of the world's population lived in an urban area. It's getting close to 80 now. So we're going to see more concentration of people in cities. And that's one of the reasons the Internet of Things is important, because cities need to operate ever more efficiently.
And you look at the ecosystem that is in Austin, the concentration of technology companies, of hardware, of semiconductor companies, of software companies. We have all the right elements here to be a real innovator in this space. And you see a lot of companies starting up. And there aren't as many semiconductor companies anymore. It's now all about connected device companies and that are taking apps and cloud services and hardware and tying all that together with software and applying that to these various areas of the economy. It's really very exciting because I view it as kind of the green field of technology. It's almost a renaissance of innovation.
I think Austin has been successful in its economic development efforts primarily because there's no other city in the U.S. that within a 100-mile radius of itself has 400,000 college and university students. We're the only one. And knowing how critical the workforce is, and particularly talent, in the attraction of new companies, I think Austin has a built-in leg up, if you will, on our competition. Question is that has brought massive amounts of people to Austin and continues to this day. So many of our roadway systems have become parking lots.
Anytime you have rapid change and rapid growth, you have rapid innovation that is going to have to happen to deal with all of that. And it's in China, it's happening at an accelerated, crazy pace. The growth there, 10-15% a year, but that's happening in Austin as well.
Yep.
And so within the U.S., this is a pretty unique spot. And you also have people with all these different perspectives and from all these different places that are all coming together in one place with a good infrastructure and a good culture and a good base from which to grow.
Yep.
Well, the trend is true that more and more people are moving into the urban core. However, that has brought a lot of challenges with parking, housing availability, affordability. The other economic ramification is that a downtown is by nature a very small geographic area, and you can only have certain employers downtown, but not manufacturing, not anything that relates to electronic assembly or some of the other sectors of the economy that are growing and are more of a natural fit for a suburban environment. While I think that downtown living is an ideal place, and I am myself considering moving to downtown, it also has a lot of economic challenges related to it. Affordability is also a big challenge. The average salary in Austin can support a home of about $185,000. The average price of a home in Austin, it's nearly $240,000.
We've also got a rising affordability issue in Austin. As more and more people move in, there's gentrification, there's more densification that's happening, and those are really interrelated. And so you look at IoT and how that is going to be able to transform the way cities are put together. I mean, it will transform the way we get around. It'll transform our roads, make those more efficient, our public transit systems, autonomous vehicles, all the transit, TNC companies like Uber and Lyft, as well as the multimodal aspect of bicycles, pedestrian, ride sharing, a lot of other aspects of transportation are going to be dramatically transformed by apps, the cloud, and all the sensing that can go on with IoT, and how that all gets tied together in new business models.
Now, something like self-driving cars will actually ultimately solve traffic problems almost completely in a couple of ways. First of all, one of the reasons traffic is frustrating is because there's a lot of things you can't do when you're driving. But if you're not driving, if the car is driving you, then you can do your email, or you can watch TV, or you can take a nap, or whatever it is you could be doing instead. If all the cars are self-driving, they can go at 150 miles an hour. Right? Human beings really can't process information fast outside of Formula One drivers, which we have here in Austin every year. Human beings can't operate at those speeds. Well, machines can. So there'll be a lot of things that will change to relieve that traffic. And that's just one example of how the Internet of Things will enable efficiencies that enable us to continue to urbanize.
Smart cities and IoT are incredibly complex and intertwined subjects. So to get a basic understanding of how the IoT works, we spoke with Aaron Allgood, CTO of Clearblade.
So one of the immediate challenges of IoT is understanding all the things that are going on inside the different pieces and parts. So I like to kind of start every conversation with, here are the big animals that we have to understand. The fun part is always to start way down on the end with the things. This is what's going to impact our world. These are the new sensors, these are the apps, these are the things sitting in people's hands. All the cool stuff that's tracking our positions, telling us our preferences. But these things are going to have to actually talk to what we call kind of the gateway level, is where the internet appears. The gateway has more compute power. It can do things like encryption. It can do things like broker messages between all of the devices and things that are out there. And it can communicate back to the cloud. So the gateway is internet enabled, and it speaks and communicate with these things. And we find that we can often run software on these that then helps move that data back to our platform infrastructure. I'm generically saying platform running in the cloud. Very often this can be platform running on infrastructure inside of an enterprise itself. And so while we have maybe a local specification or a local communication going on over here or over, say, Zigbee, if I just pick one, this communication is an internet-based standard. So we brought the internet into scope here. And so we put the I in IoT by having these two things tie together. The last pillar that we're always tempted to forget is the enterprise. And so that's when we actually duck back behind the internet and we go through a firewall and we basically access the existing systems that have been around for years and years and years. And yet again, while we had a proliferation of communication over here, we'll see that there's lots of different ways to do these communications as well. Sometimes you do native socket layers, sometimes you do SOAP, Sometimes you might even do FTP. This list goes on and on for how you integrate with those systems of record and legacy systems that may be out there. So that's really the challenge when you look at the big animals associated with what you build in IoT.
Because you have the communication, you have control, and you have sensing. And the sensors are very diverse. Think you can measure current, you can measure water flow, you can measure light, you can air quality, you can measure voltages, wind speed, building stress. I mean, there's so many different things you have to measure. And the other thing that you can do is, because you have a microprocessor at the end node, you can take multiple sensor inputs and make decisions about them. Right? So you can take GPS data and combine it with accelerometer data, and you can actually get a more accurate reading of what's actually happening at that particular point. And so there's engineers that are needed not only to do the hardware design of the inboard, but be able to take that sensor input, digitize it, and fuse it together into kind of local decisions and decide how much information actually gets sent up. So that's the actual kind of the application of gathering the data.
So now that we understand how the Internet of Things works and the innovation that it can bring to an urban environment, we wanted to talk to the City of Austin to get a better understanding of how policy can encourage that innovation.
There are some ways we are thinking about rolling out the smartness, and I'll speak of smartness now as technical smarts, the infrastructure, the sensors, the data centers, the data, to pay for all that stuff. Traditionally, the city would probably go out and try to raise taxes or create a bond and raise your taxes, and we don't want to do that. In some ways, we're going to let the private sector figure it out for us. So that's my proposal. We let the private sector figure it out for us. We have to also decide how much of our infrastructure is going to be owned by the city versus owned by, let's say, a private entity, and we lease it. Like, we have our cell phones, right? And we have our cell plan, right? And all those cell towers and out there, we do all of these great things with our cell phones, right? Well, that's all owned by the private sector, right? Well, let's say the private sector owned a lot of the intersection sensors, and they used it for private sector purposes, but also gave the city sold the city to the data to the city. That's a model that is interesting. It's raises a number of who owns the data, what can they do with the data issues.
If you think about an intersection with the cameras, the monitoring for emergency vehicles and so forth, that is the beginning of a smart city. The next phase, and this is actually going to occur probably pretty rapidly, as cities change the lighting infrastructure from incandescent to LED. At that same time, it's an opportunity to add connectivity and sensors to every light pole in a city. And when you do that, you can do things like you can monitor the number of people that walk by, the number of cars, if that parking space or those 5 parking spaces underneath the light, are they occupied? You could have an ambient light sensor that will turn on the light at dusk and turn it off at dawn. And so there's all kinds of things that you can enable once you have that light provision.
The private sector has a very strong incentive to keep that infrastructure up to date and current and with the latest and greatest. The city has an incentive to keep that stuff in the ground old and running as long as possible, not necessarily up to date. There's advantages to either one, right? But if we want to have the latest and greatest smartness, maybe we want to look into what incentives does the city have versus what incentives does the private sector have to keep that infrastructure up to date.
Think about how it all connects together. You've got to be able to have policies that encourage and incentivize private and public transportation in all the different parts of your city, because you have to be able to connect people to the transportation they need to get to the jobs that they need to support their family, to the education that they need to make that mobility upward in life, not just the ground mobility. But then you also have to be able to connect people for the things they want to do in life that are fun, whether it be entertainment. And there's no city in the U.S. like Austin that knows how to also have a good time.
Since the City of Austin will be working closely with private businesses to further its IoT agenda, let's go over to Silicon Labs to get a better understanding of the work that they're doing today.
So there's hardware, firmware, there's mobile apps, and then there's cloud. We wanted to develop a platform that allows people to rapidly conceive that you could basically put down a Bluetooth module And just with a couple simple steps, you can get up into the cloud. And so the product that we conceived is a product called Thunderboard. And so in essence, what we tried to do was we wanted to extract away all the different kinds of things that IoT could be and get it down into something that many of the engineers actually did as a child. We had a little 3D printed shell, so it's something that makers are very familiar with. We actually built a very simple sensor board. So on the sensor board, we've got a Bluetooth module, different sensors. We even have I/O like buttons and LEDs that many makers really want to play with. So one aspect of the demo is motion. So basically using an accelerometer paired with a Bluetooth, paired with a phone, we can actually show a 3D image of the car moving. So we actually put a magnet in the wheel, and so by spinning the wheel, we actually can see revolutions, total distance driven with this car, so that people can get a sense of that. To help people realize just how simple this is, we can actually click and review the raw data. So it's just basically a CSV file that it's being translated up into the cloud.
Imagine 100 Boy Scouts at a jamboree with racing their cars, and all of the data for all the cars is going into the same site. So you can do analytics on it, you can look at the fastest speed, you look at the slowest car.
Fastest acceleration.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all this data is up there so that someone, if they're really knowledgeable in the cloud, they can just splice all that data together and provide all that analytics. And it's not that hard to do.
And it makes me wonder a little bit, are there technology gaps that we have right now? I mean, are there things that we have yet to develop, or is it just really a matter of putting all the pieces together?
I think all the technology exists. And I think it's a matter of developing and deploying. And as we said earlier, I think that there's a lot of development that has to occur to do that. And also that, there's capital required to go build this infrastructure. And so there has to be a value analysis done, and it has to be the right thing for the enterprise or the city to do.
But Austin's just one city. To get a better understanding of how the IoT is affecting very real change, it's worthwhile to look at the countries on the forefront, like China, Germany, and Korea.
The country of Germany, with a population of 81 million and GNP of $1.8 trillion, was really the pioneer of IoT policy through its Industry 4.0, where they have plans to invest over 200 million euros to spur research across government, academia, and business. Specific areas include cyber-physical systems for smart manufacturing and industry. And South Korea, with more than 50 million people and a $1.6 trillion GNP, is home to Samsung and SK Telecom. It has been investing billions into Internet of Things technology. In 2016, they launched the first IoT network.
I think that Austin, in some ways, is a little bit like China. We're the fastest growing city in the US. You see a dramatic urbanization in China. You look at Shanghai. Shanghai in 2003 had 3 subway lines. Today they have 13. Each one is 25 miles long. And so you've got, in the Shanghai region, you've got over 100 million people that are now in that area. Now Austin is only 2 million people, but we've had this dramatic growth. And it's in some ways outpaced our ability from an infrastructure standpoint to sustain that growth. And so that leads to quality of life challenges. It leads to the fact that, how do we sustain the economy? And, I travel to China a lot, and you see a lot of the same sort of challenges facing those cities as you faced Austin. I mean, over there it's even more intense because you have the pollution, you have, an intense crush of people, and you also have the infrastructure is really, really behind but rapidly changing. And you also look at the amount of investment that the government is making, that is being made in general in China to solve these problems, and it's a bit of a frustration. So in some ways, Austin is not like China in the way that we're really in the US, and especially in Texas, there's not the money to be put into bringing these two new technologies to bear. And I think that that's one of the big challenges we've got, is that we have these new technologies available, we have existing technologies that are available, that we know how to solve some of these problems, but we don't have the political will with which to actually go and do something about it.
Just as we are now talking on a city by city, eventually the discussion has to be more about country by country, and to have technology and smart cities in only the Western world, it will not necessarily solve global problems if we have not brought up to speed. A lot of nations are maybe behind, both on technology and bandwidth. And so that infrastructure somehow has to be in place.
Barcelona is a fantastic example. They're actually one of the most connected cities on the globe, and they've gone through and connected everything from parking to water meters to lighting, and they've had some incredible amounts of savings. They were actually able to gain an increased amount of revenue at $50 million a year because they have sensors in the parking spots that not only help people find a spot faster, but when they got into it, allowed them to pay automatically. So it actually increased the amount of revenue and it decreased the amount of traffic or congestion in the area. So the result of this is actually very quantifiable from a city perspective and also yields tangible benefits to all of its constituents.
China has made a lot of technological advancements. I was sitting at a conference a couple of weeks ago where 19,000 miles of high-speed rail in China, more than 50% of high-speed rail in the world. And they talked about taking that number to 150,000 miles of high-speed rail. And high-speed rail, according to their definition now, it's just under 300 kilometers per hour and moving towards 600 kilometers per hour. So having a central government also with the resources, and they have the resources to apply the necessary technology, is key. And I think China is not the copycat that we've always thought of them as. I think there's a lot of technological innovation as it comes to particularly the transportation industry and consumer manufacturing. So we have to be paying attention to China because they're a major force to be reckoned with, not only in standard economic terms, but also technological evolution.
Google has been testing a self-driving car in Austin the last couple of months.
Pretty soon, you're not even going to have to touch the wheel to get from point A to point B.
What we're going to see is a rapid deployment of these wireless sensor systems because there's value.
I view it as kind of the green field of technology. It's almost a renaissance of innovation.
You see, Austin is just one piece of this puzzle. There are plenty of other markets, technologies, and policies that are all coming together to change the world in ways we've never seen before. With an estimated $11 trillion impact on the global GDP, the Internet of Things will make the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s look like a blip on the radar.